I will say there are programs that are out there that are trying to get grants to start that help with these problems. Um, but that takes years to get grants and starting up an office. So by the time they get there, there's maybe 1,000 plus people that weren't able to be helped and just end back up on the street or dying from a drug overdose because they don't want to deal with it anymore.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Interview from the Line.info. I'm Jacob Rueda, and today we're talking about homelessness in Salt Lake City. So let's get right into it. There was a report from March of this year from the Utah Department of Workforce Services that said between 2020 and 2021, homelessness in Salt Lake City increased 14% after a 4-year drop. And then there was another report from the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah that said that rent had increased 11% annually from 2020 to 2022. Now, homelessness in Salt Lake City is not a new problem, but it appears that based on these stats that it is a growing problem. And the city does have resources available for homeless people, but how effective are those programs? And are they being administered well? Here to talk with me about this is Dani Gill, who worked with a property management company who then worked in partnership with Salt Lake City. Dani, thank you so much for coming by.
No, thank you for having me.
Let me start off with there was a report from Axios in March that talked about this issue with Salt Lake City and homelessness. They interviewed a gentleman by the name of Glenn Bailey, who is the executive director over at the Crossroads Urban Center. And he says that when residents approached him about this, they felt like the homeless services that were offered by the city were, quote, inadequate. And he also said that other people had gave him some feedback and said that the situation was, quote, a nuisance and a source of crime. Um, Based on the experience that you've had, uh, how accurate are these assessments?
Um, I would have to say that they're pretty accurate. I There's a frustration that most of us people that work within the social work aspect of homeless services, the actual workers, the ones that are like the staff and the case management and people providing those services physically and helping, you know, those that are experiencing homelessness, it can be difficult because there are always things that get in the way for actual like progression and helping them get off the street, right? So there's a cap at like the road home for people to stay in beds, and there is a cap for a certain amount of time for someone to be on a voucher that's not permanent. Those vouchers usually last about a year, and when those vouchers are asked to be like rotated, so you have people on them, they get into housing, and then those vouchers are taken away from those individuals that don't have any income, that don't have any way of staying in the housing. They'll typically get kicked out because they can't pay rent and end up back in the shelter or on the street. So it's a really a vicious cycle of, yeah, the numbers say that they're getting people off the street and into homes, but they're not doing the actual percentages of people that are staying housed, right? So you have, oh, we're doing great, like the road home is like, oh, we're doing great. We have people that are being housed and we have these vouchers, but then they're not telling you what happens after they lose those vouchers. So I say that there are some good things, but also because the money is not being sent to places where they need to be, we typically just have this recessiveness of repeat people going back to the street and then starting over again. So,
It sounds to me, based on your explanation, that there's a lot of, for want of a better way of expressing it, red tape. There's a lot of qualifications. There's a lot of just things that a person has to requirements that need to be filled. Why is that?
I think I don't, it's difficult because even in housing and like working with the city for homelessness, it's not even that. It's a problem across the board. So if you have those individuals that are homeless that go to jail for crimes that they committed while they were on the street, they go to jail, but then when they're released, they don't have anything after, so they just go straight back to it, right? So they have the system is fighting against people. Um, an individual that's in a shelter, and it has to be sheltered nights consecutive, right? It has to be at least 90 days of consecutive stay in a shelter in order to be approved for a voucher for housing, right? And they sometimes they can count those up pretty decently, but then there's other things like measuring their like needs for help and whether they have income or even if they have birth certificates or social security cards. If you don't have any of that stuff, it's very difficult to get a house. Um, and that's why you have a lot of the housing case managers or case managers that help them with those things. But and then you have the government on the other side that's making it difficult to get those things, right? Birth certificates and social security cards. Um, so I think they do that. Yes, their money is there, but they make it extremely difficult for an individual that may have like mental health issues or violent issues or drug dependency to get into housing. And then there's background checks a lot of the time for certain places. So that's another added barrier to getting them into housing. And a lot of the times those people don't want to wait around because they say it's easier to live on the street than having to deal with all of the red tape and rules that they have to go through in order to keep a house.
Doesn't all of that defeat the purpose of trying to, find a solution and to help people?
Yes, and it's very frustrating being a case manager that wants to help in any aspect. You have the supervisors and people like that that fight tooth and nail and go to rallies and try and change things from the top. And a lot of times they don't listen to us because the people that are deciding who gets vouchers and who get removed from vouchers are people that are not actually working in those places. They are people up higher in the state, in like the council, in the mayor's office, people that may have at one time worked in a shelter for like a couple years and then got higher up and forgot what it really is about. And so they create a lot of problems rather than helping.
Have you ever met with any state leaders or local leaders or anything like that while you were working?
I I met the mayor once, but she was in a hurry. I've never personally met with them, but I had employers or for like the road home, you have individuals that would meet with them and try and like give them the facts and the statistics and what actually happens during that entire process. And you know how politics works. Sure, you can talk at them, but they're not actually listening because uh, someone else gets to decide where that money goes, which should change probably.
You had mentioned politics. I wanted to ask, how politicized has the issue of homelessness become?
Very, because I think a lot of the citizens of Salt Lake, so anywhere from like Sandy to northern Utah, so Rose Park, within that area, you have a lot of people that don't want places built for homelessness, and so they complain to their politicians and we don't want that trash here. I hear that a lot, unfortunately, and they don't want to mess up their perfect little neighborhoods with having a like shelter built or places for them to stay, and so they tend to kick those people out of their cities and they end up in Salt Lake, right? And so that becomes a bigger issue because you have I mean, if you were to go outside and look at the side of the mountain up by northern Salt Lake, there are camps up there. The homelessness has gotten worse. They have to go camp up higher in the mountains so they don't get, you know, arrested or, persecuted for trying to just live. So they've created like dangerous situations. But anyway, but yes, the politics of other people getting to decide what's best for the homeless population because they don't fit in is something that's ongoing.
This might seem like an obvious question, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. From the time that you were working in for this property management company, how rampant, if that's a good word to use, is homelessness in Salt Lake City?
I Within almost the 2 years that I was there, I think this last year, I think 2022 and 2023 were probably the most like percentage I'd seen like increase of homelessness. A We had people constantly like calling us or emailing us for housing because rent has increased, and typically we do fair market value, which is a based off of like income, so it's like 30% of someone's income, and then a lot of our properties ran for, it depended on if you had a voucher or not, but if you were self-pay they were about 1400 for a one bed, which is pretty low still. But the increase in the population of homelessness, or those that are beginning to enter into homelessness because of all the money and the increase in inflation of stuff in Utah specifically, it creates a problem.
It seems that Salt Lake City is constantly dealing with this issue of homelessness in some way or another. There was a KSL article from June that says that Salt Lake City was planning a quote sanctioned campground for homelessness. And then again in March, Axios reported another plan by the city to combat homelessness by providing almost 600 new housing units by 2027. And they said that they were planned to reduce the number of homeless persons by 20%. However, the article didn't say that the city said that how it doesn't say how it's going to achieve that reduction in numbers. In your opinion, what are leaders missing when it comes to addressing the problem of homelessness?
um, Actually being involved with the process, I think, and coming down to the level of most case managers or supervisors and actually seeing the day-to-day issues, they don't account for that. They also don't account for, um, so the company I used to work for, I don't know if you know the old Ramada that got turned into housing. It was a hotel off of North Temple and Lake Redwood, almost, where the company that I work for, they're trying to open that up, and it's for more for like the homeless veterans and things like that. Um, and it's ironic that they wanted to open that, but the state of Utah is giving them a hard time about that and allowing them to open that. So you have these two sides where, yeah, they want to combat like homelessness, but like on the flip side, and like they're making it more difficult for people to actually open up housing for those individuals. So it's a double-edged sword a lot of the time, and a lot of um, I don't know, hearsay, and like, yes, we want to help the homeless people, but no, you can't build that because we're going to make it difficult and we don't want to give you money to open it. So that's where that is.
Is funding a, the biggest obstacle? Is that why they're getting, they're making it difficult for them to open that shelter?
Yes, funding. I think they, after I don't know, 3 years, I think the funding was approved, but they're very lax and slow to actually give them those checks. Because you have to write grants and you have to get grant approval, and then you have to go through the city, and it has to go through the mayor, and everything has to be approved. And so if you have someone in there that's like, I don't want to sign that, you have to keep asking for it. And a lot of the times, like the road home and the VOA and the VA, things like that, they have a certain amount of grants and money, and they all fight for those grants. And so instead of working together, they're fighting each other on getting the grant money approved for each of those individual businesses in this, like, you know, um, places that actually do help. And so when you have everyone pitted against each other, because we all have the same goal in mind, it becomes more like a, well, I am better than you, so I deserve the money. When in regards to everyone across the board, we're doing the same thing, but it becomes, so the state does that where we don't have a lot of grants, and so everyone has to fight for it. And if someone doesn't get it, then they get closed down, right?
Um, Jesus. that just that just sounds so awful.
It's frustrating.
I wouldn't even know. It just seems like there is such a, how can I say this without sounding um do you think there's a bias against homelessness or against homeless people by politicians?
Yes, because a lot of the times the view on those that are experiencing homelessness is that they're lazy, or that they just don't want to get jobs. And like I had said previously, a lot of those individuals have either lost their birth certificates or social security cards or IDs, and have just lived on the streets their whole life because no one will help them. And then when you try and help them, it's like a 50-50, where they want to be helped and they will get those things. But again, the system's against them a lot of times. So if they do, there's not a lot of places that will hire them to give them money, or it's very difficult to get on like Medicare or Medicaid. Uh, and then, I've had to tell people, I said, sometimes they don't have options to get that stuff. And so they have to ask for money, or they have to steal food, or there are places like the desert industries. I'll give the Mormon Church its due, because they do help a lot of those people by hiring them. Um, but I think that the politicians just think that everyone is lazy, and they just want to live off, you know, everyone else's dime. But that's not accurate all the time, is what I'm getting at.
Well, you had mentioned earlier mental health situations. Can you kind of expand on that as far as what you've experienced, what you've seen in your line of work?
So if the state really wanted to work on those that are experiencing homelessness, they would also address the mental health issue, which when someone has any like mental health, like schizophrenia, schizoaffective, bipolar disorder, um, anything in that range, so they're not medicated, and they don't have the means to get medicated unless they go to like 4th Street Clinic, which is great. But then again, you need like your ID and things like that. So when you're not addressing the mental health concerns of those individuals, those create drug dependency issues, because of, they want to stop the voices, or they don't want to be in pain, or so those two go hand in hand. um, and a lot of the times they do that backwards. And I think if a lot of us people work in the system, if you were, we call it housing first, right? So you want to get them into housing, and then you want to get them their medications and help with their drug dependency. But in that problem, so if you go to places like Valley Behavioral Health, they have very strict rules on their programs. So if you have an individual that is off the street, goes to a program like that before they can get housing, they have to go every day to get their medications for their mental health problems, right? Or their drug dependency. You have to see a therapist in order to stay in that program, or you have to, there's a lot of rules for certain private companies that make it difficult for an individual to get to the housing. So like you have other companies that will do housing first, we'll get them in, but a lot of times they're not in a program. So then you're like, hey, do you want to go see a therapist for like your mental health issues or like your drug dependency? And a lot of times they'll say no. So there's a lot of um, there's a lot of not addressing all three of those problems at the same time. They're all separate and divided by different companies.
While I've been listening to you, why have a resource if it's not going to be made accessible or easy to use?
Um, because it all comes down to money. Really, it's like so. If you, a lot of companies will, they run off of Medicaid, right? And um, what you would call like case manager notes or notes that you have to put into a system that proves that you're seeing these individuals at a certain rate in order for Medicaid to be billed to give you the money. So if an individual, say, comes into a program, and I did this for 2 years out of the jail, so they come from jail and they get into a program, right? It's mostly court mandated in some of those. Um, and then you have to sign them up for Medicaid. And if Medicaid doesn't accept them, then they get kicked out of that program and end up either going back to jail or on the street, um, because we can't pay those bills by billing for the services we give to them, right? Same with I will say there are programs that out there that are trying to get grants to start that help with these problems. Um, but that takes years to get grants and starting up an office. So by the time they get there, there's maybe 1,000 plus people that weren't able to be helped and just end back up on the street or dying from a drug overdose because they don't want to deal with it anymore.
How is it that I don't know if it's possible to get into the thinking and the logic of politicians and leaders, but how is it that they can propose to say we want to end this problem, we want to address homelessness, we want to provide a solution to this, but then their actions or maybe just the bureaucracy and maybe that's the one thing that I I'm having trouble understanding is why does the bureaucracy and the leadership keep it's like there's a stall that's going on right now. It's just a constant stall of the process. You're saying that the red tape and they don't have this documentation. It's difficult to get this documentation. It's difficult to get into Medicaid. It's difficult for anybody to keep sustaining themselves. you know but there's this program, like you said, government is saying we want to solve it this way, but they're making it more difficult. It looks like this is a cycle that just keeps repeating. And I guess my question is, why bother? Seriously, why bother?
Um, I want to say the people that are working in social work. So I've done it for 12 years, and um, I had to leave social work in general just because I was burned out. You have individuals that constantly fight. So they constantly fight, and they think that they're getting somewhere. And I want to say about 17% of the people that we help that don't have mental health issues, that can help themselves get on their feet, they do great, right? But it's individuals that have those other issues, underlying problems, and barriers to treatment and to housing that we constantly work with, and as I've moved jobs, I've seen individuals that I thought were doing great end up in different places where I see them and I was like, okay, how did that happen? Like, I know we worked so hard with you, so where did the system break down on that? And I think everyone is, the problem is we care a lot and we want to help, but after a while, those individuals that work really hard and in those systems, we get tired. Okay, we get tired of being told no, or you can't have this grant money, or you can't have the voucher money for to create more vouchers for people to be housed, or you lose the vouchers because we need more people out of the homes, and so we really are fighting against a broken system. But we, as individuals helping those people, have like this hope that if we keep chipping away at that vicious cycle, that something eventually will give. And they've made strides, but when you don't have anyone like us up at the top, there's no give, and so a lot of us end up leaving the systems where we work because we're tired of not seeing it change, or seeing how it affects those individuals we work with, and it is heartbreaking. So, but we still hope is what it is, and we try our best.
Allow me to play devil's advocate for just a moment, if I could. Um, we took, you had mentioned that there were people who were able to get through it to a certain extent, but then they somehow got back into it, or returned to homelessness or in some state of destitution. Um, where is personal? Where? How can I say this? Where does personal accountability fit into this? How much can we say it's the system versus it's a person's choice or the choices that they made?
Um, my last couple of jobs, I we do hold them. So we have specific things we try and teach them, like dialectical behavior therapy, where they try and work through the emotions. Because a lot of the time, yeah, they do great, and the system faults them, but there are some individuals that have a slight chip on their shoulder where they think they are entitled to all the resources we have, and them not having to lift a finger to do anything about it, right? And I'm not saying they're all like that. I want to say about 30%, 25% of those individuals are like that because they just assume someone is going to help them with everything. Um, and we do to an extent, right? As case managers for the housing or mental health case managers. But it depends on how the case manager, you know, maybe that client has gone through 6 or 7, and those previous case managers hadn't set specific boundaries, or we're just letting that individual like walk all over them because they're tired and don't want to have to put up a fight anymore to have that individual actually do some of the work. Um, but there are some people, because they've been in the system long enough, um, in and out of housing or in and out of prison or jail, that they just want someone else to do the work for them and just have them reap benefits, right? So there are some individuals, and it can get very hard. And a lot of those times, those individuals, when a case manager can't help them anymore, they do end up losing housing or their jobs, or because they have behavioral issues, or are just mad at the system. So they take it out on the system and then end up losing stuff because they didn't want to do the work. So there are some of those, and those can be very draining individuals to try and help, because you want what's best for them, but you can only do so much for them without them doing anything.
You said you worked in this field for 12 years, right?
Yes.
When did you leave?
When? Oh, last month. Last month.
Okay. Oh, so just recently.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Um, the problem with Salt Lake City's homeless population has been around for a while. I think we've established that. Um, but I want to look at some of the other ways that they've tried to deal with the problem. Um, in 2020, the Salt Lake Tribune reported about how the city was supposedly praised for ending homelessness back in 2015. but the reality was much different. I think they used some sort of they used some sort of mathematical calculation to reduce the numbers or something like that. I can't remember. I'd have to look at the article again. Um, Eventually, at the end of the article, there was a man named Preston Cochran, who at the time was executive director of an organization called Shelter for the Homeless, and simply saying that the answer is more housing. Okay. Given all of that, what is being missed by suggesting that homelessness can be solved by simply having more housing available?
Um, I think, yes, more housing is great, but they have to, if they really wanted to, I don't know how you would end homelessness because, if a middle class person is struggling with paying their rent, right, it is gotta be like a capitalistic economy type shift where you actually have people that are paid more and have access to different, just better living conditions. So if they are building more housing, but we still have those barriers put in place for people to get into that housing, right? Do they have aggression? Do they have mental health issues? Do they have jail time or prison time? And that all counts. And sometimes they won't allow those people into housing because they don't want to deal with it. Uh, the problem is I don't know if you remember the shelter that was over downtown for the road home. That was a pretty big shelter. It housed probably about 300 beds, right? 300 to 500. And when they closed that down because it was condemned, they created, two other road home shelters, but only those shelters can only house about 100 beds. So in closing a bigger place down and trying to create more road homes, they lost a lot of beds for individuals. So yeah, they can create more housing, but if they're not accounting for actually people that need them and picking and choosing how and who they want in those beds, then that's not ever going to be fixed.
You had mentioned the road home a few times. Can you tell me what exactly are they and what do they do?
It, the road home is great. They do a lot of services. So within the different units they have like a family road home. They have a men's shelter, a women's shelter. They have the Gill Miller, which is a mixture of both. Um, they offer, so they do have people there that help them get jobs or get on their feet with the birth certificates and social security cards and getting on lists to find apartments and things like that. um, if they're more cognitive, like aware, they offer like laundry mats and meals to individuals that get to actually stay inside the shelter. So every day, a lot of the individuals, if they don't have like permanent, like long-term beds, have to get in line and sign up again to get a bed that night. And if they don't, then they have to go sleep on the street. So but that's only because they have this cap on their building because of ordinances that were placed on them by the city, right? So the road home does incredible things. They go out to homeless camps and check on people and see if they need services and try and bring them into the shelters for case management help. Um, they they get them to like Fourth Street Clinic. A lot of the housing case managers work really hard. They take their own vehicles. They go find people. They bring them in to make sure they're not harmed. Um, so the road home does incredible things. They just they get hurt from the inability to get more money for things that they want to actually grow and help people with.
How many organizations like the Road Home are in Salt Lake City?
Um, let's see. You have the Volunteers of America. You have the Odyssey House program. There's a few of those. Um, you have the VA that works with homeless vets a lot of the time. Um, you have the Housing Authority of Salt Lake. They do just mostly housing, but um, they all kind of work individually. So, and then you have Valley Behavioral, you have private companies sometimes, and things like that. So there's, I want to say anywhere from 10 to 15 different community partners that try and work on the situation, but because of grants and things like that, there's a lot of miscommunication between all of us. And so we do as community partners, we do try and be all on the same page, and we meet and we have, meetings with one another, so we all have an understanding of, because we share a lot of individuals in different housing places. And so they meet at least once a month to try and go over what needs are being met, what needs to happen with those individuals, and how, where we're missing a step so we can help them better.
I want to go back to this, or rather, talk about a report from KUTV from March of this year that talked about how some of the heads of some of these organizations that help the homeless in Salt Lake City were earning between $100,000 and $200,000 a year. Now, in that report, there was a man named Bob Danielson, and he owns a company that's next to the Gail Miller Resource Center. And he says that for anyone making that kind of money, there has to be some result in what they're doing to justify that kind of salary. And this, more of an editorial question than anything, what does it say for the cause of homeless advocacy when the heads of agencies are making such large salaries and the problem they're working to solve is continuing to be there?
I want to say a lot of those, there are some really good people in like program directing, right? Who have started at the bottom and like kind of got placed into that position. Those people make the changes, but it's the higher ups that don't ever get involved with any of like the actual employees. So they make that money right at the top. And we know about trickle down economics. I will tell you that a case manager that works at any of those places, who are required most of the time to have a bachelor's or a master's to be in a position, only make probably $17 to $18 a hour. That's it. Required to have a degree. Um, and
I'm sorry, you said a master's?
yeah,
Okay.
yes. So those are the requirements. And they're not getting paid what they're worth, because we do, yes, we work 40 hours a week, but if you really are working anywhere from 40 to 45, but not getting paid to do the extra work, because we're given all these things that we have to do, right? And we complain to the higher ups, and they often don't change it. They have this set of every like job, whatever, explaining the job, and so when someone gets hired, they lie about what you have to actually do. So they're like, oh, you just have to do this, but then they add more stuff on when you're there, and then so you have like this exit of like people that maybe are from school after they got their bachelor's, right, and they've never been in social work. They go to work at the road home, and they're getting paid $17 an hour to deal on a daily basis with who knows what, from anywhere from a meltdown or someone fighting to mental health issues or drug dependency problems. And they typically end up leaving within 2 months of being hired, because it's not what they expected and not what people tell you. you know they don't tell you in college what you deal with, ever. And but so the higher up people don't ever change anything, and they get mad that we have people not being hired or staying in jobs. It's because they're not paying people enough to stay in those jobs for what we have to deal with. And sometimes they don't care. They don't care. if I'm being completely honest.
In summary, what can be said or done about this situation, whether it's in Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, or anywhere else in the nation, you know, that can maybe, if not shed some light on the solution, maybe provide some sort of uh, path to something that might offer some sort of consolation, or maybe even the slightest bit of healing to this situation, because it seems like it's dire. And like you said, part of it is systemic, some part of it is personal. you know um Clearly, like you said, the system is, as you call it, broken, and there's clear evidence of that. But can something to the effect of a light be provided for this? Because it seems like this is a bigger problem than maybe is being presented by the media or by politicians.
It's about creating an awareness, I think, of all those different programs out there and the individuals fighting to help those that are experiencing homelessness. Educating yourself really on like how the housing program works and how vouchers work, and actually, voting for when things come up in a positive light. I know a lot of individuals that go through their daily life in Salt Lake or whatever, scoff and like think homeless people are disgusting. Um, I always tell people you're always a paycheck away from being the same place, right? If you were not to make a paycheck, you are headed in that same direction. So I feel like it's about awareness, but it's also about having compassion, um, and a little bit more of understanding of what those individuals have to go through in order to get off the street, honestly. And then you know, asking those tough questions. If you are involved in politics or you're close to like the Senate or any of those higher politicians, start asking those hard questions. A lot of people don't ask those hard questions, or call them out. Um, there's a lot of times where we have like homelessness like rallies and like participation events. So if you start going to those also and like learning more about how you can actually help, I think that will start to have more an effect if the people get involved rather than people from the inside trying to change it, if that makes sense.
What's the biggest shift that can happen? What's the biggest shift that can take place that can revolutionize this entire process and make it so that homelessness can be addressed and maybe even solved?
I think if the politicians were to actually start meeting with, like on a personal level, for longer than 15 minutes on over a video conference, if they actually, came to a place of like where the homeless people stay, or like talking to individuals that work within the system and maybe hang out with them for 1 or 2 days to see how it actually is, I think that would start to change their mindsets a little more. Um, it's just more about working as a one individual unit rather than being spread across everywhere. So I honestly think if the mayor, she's a great lady. I don't have anything against her. And she does a lot of hard work to try and change things. But it's like the president; she can only do so much, right? So it's people below her that have to get involved in actually seeing day to day stuff and the issues we deal with, instead of the overall picture and the statistics that they get from things that are often not accurate at all. So I think if they were to talk to someone like me or someone that was in for a very long time, there's people that have been working in that system for 15 plus years. If they were to sit down with them, I think that would change a lot of views and help speed things along, and not having all that red tape involved when you had to like get grants or opening of housing, stuff like that.
Is there anything else that you want to add or say that that hasn't been addressed in this conversation?
I just the people that work in those community partners and that are doing that work. Um, if you know someone that works in social work, give them a hug. Seriously, we we deal with what's called secondary trauma, where things happen around us and we see so many horrible things. And we deal with a lot, and a lot of times people don't understand what its toll it takes on us. And so I just maybe try and like get to know them a little bit more, or just like thank them the next time you see them, because they don't get thanked a whole lot. So that would be my message.
All right, Danny. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today and to talk about this very difficult and very serious issue. I hope that maybe in the future that we will be able to find some sort of common ground between um, agencies, workers, and politicians and leaders, and maybe find a solution to this. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Be sure to follow theline.info on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, take care.